if you're the type of producer, realtor, loan officer, whoever, and you just come in there and tell everybody how it is all the time, and you don't consider where they're coming from and listen to what challenges they have, you're going to have a really hard time running a team.
Hello and welcome to episode 244 of the Smart Agents Podcast. As always, my name is Michael Walter and I'll be your host. On today's episode, we are joined by John Donnelly, Executive Director of Sales at Service First Mortgage, to talk all things leadership, recruiting, and building high-performing teams. Emphasizing the transition from being a doer to a leader, the importance of defining clear roles when scaling a team, and the necessity for continuous learning and self-leadership, John is full of great insights for anyone looking to scale their businesses. But before we get on with today's featured interview, if you or someone else on your team has an incredible story of real estate success or tips to share with our community, send us a message to feedback@smartagents.com. We're always on the lookout for new guests to inspire our listeners. And lastly, if you enjoyed this conversation and want to hear more, be sure to subscribe to the Smart Agents Podcast. We stream on all major podcasting platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. All right, let's get on with our conversation with John Donnelly. If you're interested in learning more about business leadership, be sure to check out the episode description for links to all of John's social channels. Really, the way I like to start everything out is if you could just introduce yourself to us a little bit. Tell us who you are and a bit on your background.
Sure, I'm John Donnelly. I work at Service First Mortgage. Been here since February of 2009. So if you think about that time, it's pretty interesting time in the market. I started in 1997 as a loan officer. I worked in some call centers, and then I wanted to be a real loan officer. So I transitioned out to, referral-based type loan officer, built my team, built my production, and I just started having success recruiting. And so, I'd used kind of my team as the base to recruit, one or two people at a time, and built a branch. And that kind of turned into some other branches. And you look forward, where I've kind of ended up is I kind of do coaching and recruiting, and I run a division for a mortgage company. So just kind of natural progression. Some people stay in production, and that's great. I just found my calling was probably that leadership role, the coaching role, and in that recruiting role. So that's kind of what I do today is I teach classes, I coach people, I'm recruiting. And so that's what my days are different every day, but it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, our audience base is predominantly real estate agents and brokers. And, there's so much parallel between, building a team in the real estate space and building a team in the mortgage space. I feel like, your tips and advice are cross, they cross both, so well.
Absolutely. I think, I've built my own team before, and then I've helped people kind of scale up into some really large numbers. We have a couple producers here that have 6, 7 people on a team that do, large numbers, recognized nationwide kind of people. But the first thing I think about just is that first step when you hire your first assistant, and how do you start a team? That's the one that is kind of interesting to me. You have to make sure that your systems are in place. You have a phone number that rings to both of you. You have a team email. Just the basic little things are kind of in order. But the most important thing is you have to get clear on who's going to do what. The first thing I do when somebody hires an assistant is we get in a room with a whiteboard and we write down the entire process. Just the whole, from the lead coming in, how do you get the lead? And then you just write it all on the board, and then you put people's names by it. And you say, okay, who's going to do what here between the two of us? And that's where we start. And then you write your job descriptions, and you kind of figure out your cadence of meetings. You got to meet with your assistant. I have an assistant today I meet every single morning with. You've got to be in sync. And so I recommend that you always have some kind of a cadence of accountability, if you will, for that morning meeting. And that's what starts it. What I find is the biggest challenge when building a team is a lot of times you've got to let go of a lot of things you've been doing, and it feels good to do a lot of that work. And so you might be, if it was a realtor, you might be calling and gathering information and putting things together and doing some admin work, and it feels good because you feel productive. But really, that's what you just hired somebody to do. And if you start to do that, you become their assistant. It's kind of the joke that you see. And so you've got to know what you're going to turn to. And then that's the hard part. So as a coach, kind of helping people through that moment, you've got to have clarity on, really, it's marketing. We know that, you're going to go market more. So how are you going to do that? Are you going to time block it? Do you know who you're going to call? That type of thing. And so if you know what you're going to turn to, then you almost have to help your assistant help hold you accountable to push back and say, I got all this stuff you hired me to do, but you've got to go market to grow this team so you can afford to have the assistant now. Otherwise, you're just going to have two people and no more business.
Yeah. I mean, tell me, from, having that growth mindset of somebody that I'm now, my main role here is to build the team and to scale the team. And it's not necessarily that, kind of doer role, because it is kind of gratifying. You're like checking the things off the box.
Yeah.
If you're doing all that admin work, you feel productive. But like you said, those aren't the things that are going to help you, scale
Right.
your business.
You got to be clear on your priorities. To me, it's like a vision, where is the team going to go? And when that vision's really clear, it just pulls you. It just pulls you at it. And you start, you almost know what to do because you're like, okay, this is where we're going. I've got to work on those things now. But if you're not sure exactly what that team is going to look like, then you got to spend some time on it and get clear on the vision first.
Yeah. And you talked about, really kind of, almost writing out, the different roles and things on the whiteboard. But even beyond that, somebody that is looking to build their team, what do you do with folks, or what are some of those tips for, gaining that bigger picture clarity on, the type of team that they want to build?
Yes.
Or, the business.
Here's what I've done. I've had the luxury of working with lots of different teams, and so I put together, over the years, I've done this multiple times. I've put together small groups of teams. So in those teams, there may be a couple of like people where you want to go. The big team's already structured, so somebody represents that team. And there may be some others that are building their team. And then I let them present to each other in that team, almost like a mastermind, if you will. And so I don't know all the answers, and so I just get to see what a lot of people do. So if I can put those people in a room together and they can learn from each other, that's where the magic happens for me. And so I've done that on Zoom. I did at one time. I had a call going with 5 different teams, and I asked them each to present their team structure for 5 weeks. So it's pretty straightforward. Each week a different team presents, and it got kind of redundant at the end. But through that process, everyone learned these little bitty tricks. How do you use, maybe it's Zoom phone or whatever kind of phone service, and have these little tricks to help you scale and handle leads a different way, or whatever it is, email tips and tricks, best practices. It's just like little things like that sometimes that come out of it. But ultimately, you learn how somebody else is doing it. And I think that's the best way. I've learned that way for myself is sometimes I don't know, I found myself going, okay, where do I want to go next? And when I see somebody else create that vision, I'm like, that's where I want to go. I didn't know it, but I see somebody else do it. Now I know, it's more clear when you see somebody else doing it.
Yeah. But even like, those little technology tips. Because I was just speaking with a gentleman earlier this morning, and it was, we were talking about launching the brokerage, and it is all those little things that you don't think of.
Yeah.
Like when you have that big idea of, I want to start my own business, it's all those, all the communication tools, all the tech stack that you're going to be bringing in and building up for your eventual team, and really kind of knowing what's available to you.
It's hard. And I think you learn by hearing what's working for other people more than you learn by just looking on websites and looking at the software. You want to hear real life, examples of what people are doing and how they're making it work. That's what we do. In our mortgage business here, we try not to be in the IT business. We don't want to create our own CRM, or we just want to use the latest and greatest for as long as we can until we have to change. But none of us want to be in the IT business where we're having to hold up a server and do things like that. There's so much cool technology now that's available.
Yeah. when you are, you know, for folks that are looking to start their, grow their teams or even, launching their team from the ground up, do you recommend starting with that, that kind of admin assistant first before
Yeah.
adding on another agent or two?
Yeah. I think this relates to real estate pretty well. There's when you make the step to having two assistants in this team, I think of like a front end and a back end person, and and then growing to two front end people is kind of how I look at it. And the back end is more admin. And so if you think about how business flows in, you're talking to buyers or sellers, and you're getting deals under contract. Well, that like a front end person is going to help you with all that type of admin on the sales side or right up front. And then once you get something put together, the back end person is going to be, we call them LOA, a team loan officer is what I call that front end person, and a loan officer assistant on the back end in mortgage terms. But, the first step to me is the LOA, is the admin person first, because you can focus on sales. It's your team, it's your business. And then the next person, which is really it's harder to get the second person than the first, in my opinion. But that next person, it needs to help you with sales on that front end. This is what I think, what I've seen over the years. And then eventually, if you look forward, then you can have both of them be sales. And I call that going from a 1-lane highway to where you just everything bottleneck. Everybody knows it's an assembly line, this one to this one to this one. And then when you separate them out, you have like a 2-lane highway, so you have more capacity. And then you might have an admin behind the two of them, and then you might grow to 2 admins, and then, you just kind of keep scaling that team. But you got to think about there's only so much capacity each person has. And so I have one team that has a loan officer, 4 team LOs, and 2 LOAs behind it. So let's just say the team LOs could handle 20 loans a month. Well, that capacity of that team is about 80 loans a month. If I need to go to 100, I got to add another team LO and maybe an admin. Just that's a large example of it. But I also say going from 1 to 2 is a big difference. You become a manager of people. You start to really think about your calendars and figure out who's going to cover. It's just different. It's so easy when it's 2 people because you're just calling each other and working together. It's just very natural. But that second person really changes the dynamics.
Talk to me about that shift, for a person that goes from that doer to the manager and having to learn how to be a leader. What are some of your tips, or maybe some of the leadership philosophies that you really follow?
Yeah, I think my first thing is self-leadership first. I'm always. I need to work on myself. I need to make sure my skills are developed to lead that team. I think my superpower, I'm just kind of thinking of myself, is listening, which really is good for leadership because people, they want to be heard, and you need to know how to position yourself. If you're the type of producer, realtor, loan officer, whoever, and you just come in there and tell everybody how it is all the time, and you don't consider where they're coming from and listen to what challenges they have, you're going to have a really hard time running a team. That's what I've seen. But once you start getting into that leadership role, you need to become a student of leadership, in my opinion. You start reading books. You need to listen to speakers. You need to listen to your podcasts, that type of thing. But that's where it begins. I take the role of servant leadership, which simply means I want more from people than I want more for people than I want from people. Right. And when I'm going into my team that way and I'm trying to build them up, I'm going to win if they're succeeding in their job, ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like what talking about, being a student yourself. So many of the people that I've spoken to that, their businesses really took off from a leadership standpoint, from a scaling standpoint, is when they, joined masterminds or, hired, business coaches, accountability coaches to keep them accountable as well, and make sure that they're on track, but then also just to, expand and be exposed to different ways of thinking.
Yeah, I think, man, you're kind of getting me in a sweet spot here. I want to share something you just made me think of,
Yeah.
but for me, I mean, if you look at high performance type individuals, I think of sports. Michael Jordan had a coach. Everybody had a coach. Kobe Bryant had a coach. All these guys that are big top performers. So we should have coaches if we want to go to that next level. I've been through lots of coaching, and when I get into those rooms, in those masterminds with other people that have gone where I'm trying to go, that's to me where the magic happens. The coaches are great, but it's those other people that you get connected with that really goes. Another thing that I've recently came up with, kind of listening to a couple books, and I did a 12-hour walk, which is kind of crazy. And I did this walk, and I just, you think for 12 hours and you walk. And one of the things that came out of it is right in this vein here is I was trying to think about, like, who am I trying to be as a leader? Who am I trying to become? And I thought about 10 different people, from John Maxwell to Tony Robbins to Kobe Bryant. And I was like, these are different people that I want to model certain aspects of their, leadership into my life. And I found this common thread that I came up with. It was just, I'm trying to become a class act in leadership. Is just the way I tell myself. Like, if I look at my board of directors of 10 people that I chose, that could change down the road. It's just something I've got in my head. But I have this thought of these 10 guys, and they're advising me based on their careers and their life to be this class act in leadership. What would these two people tell me, and what advice would I have? So kind of a goofy way of looking at things, but it's been really good for me to try to feel like I'm getting advice from these mentors that I don't always, I don't know them. I don't know these people, but I've read their books, and I'm seeking out more about these people, and I'm learning what makes them special. And I'm trying to take that little piece from this person, a little piece from that person, and come up with my own, my own style, my own flavor. And, I'm not perfect, but if I can just be a class act, if someday somebody tells me, hey man, you really are a class act, then I feel like, man, I made it. I did it. But I'm not trying to tell people that's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to be that way, if you will.
Yeah. I really like, that idea of, it's not just, reading that person's, the book or the biography or whatever, coaching philosophy they have, but learning more about the person as an individual. I think that's really interesting. My son, I was telling you off before we were recording, he's a baseball player,
Right.
and he's only 10, but he has gotten so into watching these little like documentaries that the different college teams put out with their players, and he noticed that in a lot of it, they all talk so much about the work they put in away from practice, their own time. And like, he is all on board on that now. Like, that's his thing, because like he kept hearing all these guys talk about, their upbringing and what they did. And I think, kind of in your same vein, like going deeper beyond just what, that person's main philosophy is, but what makes them tick and why, how they got to that
Right.
point. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. And just by going down that discovery, you may not like some of the things you find, and you may change your little board of directors, if you will. But also I'm finding things out about people I didn't know that, like one of the stories Kobe Bryant has is kind of common, people know, but when they went to the Olympics, the whole team went out partying all night, and then they came in at 4 a.m. and he's out on the court and he's shooting. And they're like, what are you doing? He goes, I want you guys to know how much this means to me. I'm still practicing. I mean, that's a different level right there.
Yeah.
That's a class act. Like he's setting an example for everybody. So when you start learning stuff like that, if your kids learn that at their age, practice by yourself in the dark when nobody's watching, that's where all the magic happens. And then they just see you having success. It doesn't happen overnight. It's like the iceberg drawing, you only see the tip. So,
right. Kind of switching gears a little bit. You talked a lot about, how you're heavily involved in recruiting and building, of the teams, not just, setting the foundation for the leaders to scale their businesses, but also on the recruiting of, adding people. What are some of your, favorite ways to, market a team, or, to kind of advertise for that business to start bringing in?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you got to know who you're looking for. So start there. What's that avatar? Are you looking for, a team, admin, an assistant, another realtor? What is that? And then what kind of traits do they have? Here at our company, we looked at all of our top producers and we came up with these common traits. And it's really simple: good, happy, energetic, positive, productive, professional, we people. I can rattle that off at any moment. We wrote it on a wall in one of our offices. And it's really simple. Those are just things. As I'm doing an interview or I'm talking to somebody, I'm thinking about that. Are they this? Are they an I person or a we person? Are they professional? How are they coming off? That type of thing. So get clear first on who you're aiming at. And then next, how do you find these people? So there's a lot of ways you find these people. The best, most successful way for me, depending on the type, is my own efforts. As a recruiter, it's really hard for me to hire somebody else to make a bunch of calls and then get introductions. That's the way a lot of people do things. It's just the results are minimal. It's a way, and we all try it, if you will. Reaching out to people directly when you're the one hiring is the best way. And then for some of these type of roles, especially admin roles or operations roles, we use Indeed and LinkedIn, and we post, and then we go through resumes, and we can find people that way through our efforts in more of a traditional way. But as far as recruiting top talent, nobody that's a top talent type producer is going to apply to your ad. That ain't going to happen. We know that. And so what they are going to do is they're going to chat to your leadership style. I call it being an attractive leader. My goal every day is I post on social media through my leadership style, who I am as a leader and what it's like to work with me. Does that make my phone ring with leads? No. But what it does, it softens the beaches when I make those outbound efforts. When I start reaching out to people and then they go, who is this guy, John? And then they see who I am. I'm hoping that attracts the right people to me that fit that avatar of who I'm aiming at. And so direct messages on social media are probably as good as calls nowadays. It's just the same. And so you got to call people, you got to reach out to people, you got to use your network. Same thing we know. If somebody knows somebody, you've got to ask for the introduction. And I remember one of my loan officers one time has a partner, real estate agent partner, and he was trying to get to somebody else in the office. So he asked his partner, hey, you work with him. Would you introduce him to me? And they're like, why? He goes, I have capacity to grow my business. I thought I might take him to lunch and get to know him better. And they're like, you never took me to lunch. I'm like, woo, you got to be careful the way you ask and what you do, because, you got to make sure you're taking care of the people you already have also. But when you're trying to grow your business like that, word of mouth is the best ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was speaking with a gentleman a month or so ago. We talked about, attracting those top producers, whether it's, in the mortgage space or real estate space, being able to communicate your offer and really stand behind what you have, what makes you stand out, and what makes your, place of business special.
Yeah. I think you have to lead by example. That's the most important thing. And whatever that example is you're trying to recruit, you've got to show that you kind of have the skins on the wall and you've been there. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to bring people in at a higher level of success. A lot of times people don't want to work for somebody who hasn't been where they're trying to go. And so you got to showcase that, however that is, that when your message in recruiting is out there, they've got to see that and want to come work for you. One of the things that worked for me early in my career is I just kind of like we just talked about, I built my team in a way, and I would reach out to others and say, hey, if you want to scale up your business, I have a team. I have a playbook. I have job descriptions. I can plug into my team and I'll show you how to do it. That's real attractive, and when you have a vision that's easy and it just pulls people at you, that's that offering that you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So from beyond the recruiting kind of dive into a little bit of, maybe the retention or, management of these folks, because, real estate, mortgage, it's a lot of, it's kind of that independent contractor.
It
These are not
is.
people, these are people that got into these professions because they didn't want the traditional, 9 to 5 punching in,
Exactly.
they want to be responsible for what they bring in. And so sometimes, things can kind of stray a little bit here and there. And like, how do you, kind of, when you do find somebody or you see the signs of somebody that's starting to stray, kind of guide them back onto your guard, to your track?
That's a great question. I had somebody recently in that boat that came to me, thank goodness, and just said, "Hey, I'm not feeling connected." This was like November, this recently. I'm not feeling real connected. Where the company's going, I'm just not feeling it. And I said, "Hey, what about setting up a weekly call for the next 6 weeks? We won't go any further. We'll reevaluate it at 6 weeks, and let's just make sure that you've got your plan dialed in, and I'll help you kind of see what we're doing." We talked for a while, obviously, before that, but that's kind of where we settled. And then after that 6 weeks, it just ended not that long ago. We extended a little bit longer, but he's like, "I'm so glad we did that. It allowed me to just talk to him, listen to him, hear him out, and realize that a lot of times it wasn't the company or what he was feeling disconnected. It was him. He was feeling lost. He didn't know what to do. And so I helped him kind of get back on track. But, it's harder nowadays with people. Nobody goes to an office hardly. Even at meetings, they're real estate, mortgage, whatever. And it's hard to even get people together. And so we're all struggling with that a little bit. Something I've been doing recently, we changed CRMs and rolled out a new version of one. And so we set up this call every Friday for an hour. And we just literally log in and work on our CRM. And we say, get a cup of coffee and get on there and just log in and work on your CRM. Sometimes it's a little chatty and personal. A lot of times it's about business development and not even about the CRM. But the one thing I've taken away from that, every person that gets on that, there's about 12 people, 10 people, 8, 15, it kind of varies. They're like, "I just love feeling connected to talk to people just for that hour." It makes you focus and just have this connection. We have a company picnic we're doing, in a couple of weeks. We have about 300 employees. Well, only about 100 RSVP'd because 200 don't live close enough to come to a picnic. And so you think about, like, you're like, man, do they feel left out? How do you make them feel connected? Like, you're always trying to find ways. We do a company call every quarter, kind of just a state of the union. Here's where the company is going. And one thing we do, I think is nice, is we just have a place where you can call out people for doing a great job inside the company. Mm-hmm. And all of those all those people that for that quarter get recognized on that call. Everyone wants to hear their name and they want to feel like they're making a difference. So if we can come up with anything somebody's doing, we're going to call them out on those calls and make them feel special. We do a President's Club trip to, recognize the top producers. And I think the trip is great, but I think it's mostly about the recognition. They get their little email signatures and the trophies, and because that's the type, salespeople are driven a lot of times that way. So, those are the things we're doing. Are they perfect? No. It used to be easier when people were in the office and you could see each other. But nowadays, man, is it challenging when everybody's remote and they're not even in the same town. And you can't even get together, even if you put together something. They won't all come. Right. So that makes it hard.
Yeah, definitely. But I do think, even, like having that weekly meeting with the CRM, I mean, I think that also shows like that you're invested in them learning the tools and properly, utilizing them, and it's just making their jobs easier. I think by, getting on those calls yourself, I think that's such a big, a big positive for folks to know that, hey, I know the top leadership is here and is willing to support us getting better.
Yeah, it matters. I also do a call once a week or once a month, just from my seat, saying, here's the things we're working on as the company. Here's some things that changed in our industry, just stuff like that. And then my goal is to send out a weekly video of things that I see going on in the industry to my team. So that they see me and they hear me. If I don't have enough to say, I don't send the video. I don't want it to be just going on without any content to it. So I may do it every couple of weeks. Depends on what's happening. I mean, you can always come up with something, but I want to really feel it when I send it. That's my kind of, if I don't want to listen to it, then that's not good. If I think what I'm sharing is really valuable, then I hope it connects with other people. But those are little things I do to try my best to just keep people connected, and let them know what's going on and that they're valued here at the company.
You talked about, also, not just with your own company, but, really, speaking to different leadership groups and being involved in the scaling. Talk to me about, the desire to do that. And, for you personally, going and, sharing your advice and your wisdom with other folks looking to scale up their businesses.
Yeah. Like kind of my journey was I joined a group that I got one-on-one coaching from every other week. It's really about accountability. That coaching was, what are you working on? Did you do it? That type of thing. You don't have to pay somebody for that. A lot of times you can find somebody that's going to be an accountability partner if you're serious about it. But what that group opened up for me is it opened up getting in a room with other people that are in my role around the country that are doing things I'm doing at a larger scale. I was just happy to be in that room. I think when you're in those rooms of people that have a lot of success, that's amazing to get to ask questions and learn from those people. And so you got to take advantage of it. You got to find some time to. I'm a big person. I'll just pull people aside. I'll call them after the event and I'll ask the questions. I'm not always in the moment. Am I going to pull them aside and really try to figure it all out right there? But I'll follow up with people and that's how I form my relationships. With others, I have friends and colleagues at other mortgage industry companies around the U.S. right now that when things get crazy, you start calling each other and saying, hey, what's going on? But also you might call and say, I'm trying to get here. And I know they would spend a little time with me and tell me how they got to that place that I'm trying to break through that ceiling on. So it's about finding a group for you that you has common core values. There's different coaching groups and they're all kind of different, but you got to find the one that speaks to you, that has your core values and that has the people in those rooms that you want to connect with. It's not just about the coaches, it's also about those other people that you get access to. So
when you first started joining those rooms and, maybe going to different networking events or things like that, were you surprised at how willing other people were to share their secrets?
Yeah. I actually, years ago, it's funny. I have probably, I don't know, at least 50 tags of events I've been to. I've saved them for 10 years or more. And the first thing I remember is thinking, well, how on earth is this person on this stage and they're sharing their best stuff, And then I learned from a couple mentors that, 90% of people aren't going to implement anything they say. Maybe 10% will implement some of it. And so, you might as well give your best stuff away because people aren't going to implement it anyway. And that was eye-opening for me early on in my career. And so, yeah, people share everything. I mean, I guess there's maybe some moments where you don't want to share, but I'm an open book. And so I think that even if you're in my competition, you're probably not going to implement a lot of things my way, the way I do it. I mean, but I'll be happy to share. And if that makes a difference, that's great. So that was a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when I talk to people about whenever they, were seeking out a mentor or something like that. There, a lot of times people were afraid to approach people because they thought, they don't want to, they don't want to, give me this advice or, spend the time, working with me. And then they quickly found out how wrong they were about that and how willing so many people are to share, what got them to where they are.
Man, I feel that in my life as a parent and as a professional. My daughter had one of her friends reach out to me last year and just ask for some advice and turned into this little book club. And so him and a couple others have this book club going. And I feel like that's one of my most favorite things is to get to pour into these kids and share some books with them and talk about business and life and leadership. But then if I get to do that with other people in the industry, that's just as exciting. And yeah, that's a great takeaway is people want to help people. Don't be afraid. Go back to recruiting. I'm silly enough. A lot of times I'll read a book and I'll reach out to the author, and I'll just tell them here's what it meant to me or whatever. There's a book called Blue Fishing by Steve Sims. I don't know if you heard of that book. It's a really great book. It's kind of about how to stand out in the world and be different. It's great for realtors for sure because it helps you with like marketing ideas. One example that came out of this book was, a client went on vacation, and so they took the picture of their family and framed it and sent it to them. Now that sits on their desk, and every time they see it, they think of that realtor that sent that framed picture. Personally, I have a realtor friend that's done family photos every year. I have 3 giant family photos in my house of our family that I would never have had if it wasn't for him doing that event. And every time I see it, I think of him. I mean, I'm like, so this is kind of that idea, but I reached out to Steve Sims, author of that book. And I was like, hey man, I love this book. We ended up hiring him to come into our event. And then I incorporated it into my recruiting efforts, giving that book away. And then I had him make a video that I could use for all my different approaches. So it would basically, his little video was like, hey, John said he's sharing your book with me. That's awesome. I really respect him as a leader and as a friend. I hope you really love the book, and you consider working with John. Just a different approach, right? Like that's kind of next level. And you could do that with probably any author almost. There's almost any author would love to partner with you to do stuff like that. I've done that with 5 different books probably over time. So
yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. And I love the idea of an agent hosting a family portrait, event. Like that's killer. Cause you put that out. I mean, I know my wife's always hounded me. We got to get family photos where, the kids are only going to be this age for so long.
Yep.
And, if there was a way to go knock it out, and we would be there.
Yeah. He did it right around holidays, like Thanksgiving time. And he had a photographer set up a backdrop to where like we brought our dog a couple times, it was cool. And that picture was just so good. We just sent it off and really made it, he got us the picture. We made it bigger and fancier. But that's a great event. Talk about working your sphere and staying in front of people. Cause I always say, I love doing events, classes or whatever. It's all about the calls leading up to it and the calls after. That's where the money's made. The event itself is fine, but it's all that connection that you get that really drives all the leads.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I feel like, this conversation, about leadership and scaling and even the marketing things, I mean, we could go for hours on different topics, but where, for people that are listening to this, where can they find, more of this type of content, from you and, the different things you're doing?
Yeah, I think my best spot at the moment is LinkedIn. I live in LinkedIn. I teach classes to realtors on LinkedIn. They don't understand how to build a profile that attracts people. And so I do that. But I'm working on a couple other things that will open up some more connection. JohnDonnelly.com kind of drives you to me, but LinkedIn, ultimately, John Donnelly on LinkedIn. You'll see me. I'm about to launch a newsletter. I post every day about all this stuff we're talking about. It's the same stuff, it's so good. It's whatever I connect with everybody. So appreciate that.
Awesome. I really do appreciate talking to you and you taking the time to join us today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a great conversation.
I really want to thank John for taking the time to share his tips and personal insights on building high-performing teams. Remember, if you'd like to learn more or connect with John, be sure to check out the episode description for links to his social channels. So once again, if you think you or someone else on your team has an incredible story or tips to share with our community, send us a message to feedback@smartagents.com. Well, that wraps things up for this episode, but remember, follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts and make sure to subscribe to the Smart Agents YouTube channel. Again, I'm Michael Walter, and we'll see you on the next episode.